lot to get through. Really happy to see everyone today. I'm excited about the educational experience that we're going to put before you. I believe it's very differently minded, literally differently minded, and it's very timely. It's a timely exercise. We've had to learn to adapt and adjust and change how we work, how we instruct, how we interact with others, or how we cannot interact with others. The presence of COVID, our landscape doesn't look the same, and we can't afford to view it as we did before. So today we're going to learn how to look at things inwardly, so we can better affect things outwardly. If we don't learn to improve ourselves, how can we expect to help, our apprentices and our journey workers and everyone around us, even at home? A better us makes for a greater impact for everyone. And we can use this education to improve everything around us. Like I said, our home life, our work lives, our health, so we can keep working like dogs for a lot longer, So we're going to go over just real quickly the webinar best practices and etiquette. Obviously, we want you guys to stay on mute throughout the presentation. We have multiple co-hosts and we don't want to create any confusion. We would like you to pose all your questions in the chat thread, where we'll try to answer them there's a couple Q&A portions of the presentation. Time is a premium today, and we will do our best to get to all of them. If we don't get to all of them, there will be a follow-up session sometime probably in February, and we'll submit questions and stuff for that. And we're going to go over that a little bit more at the end of today's discussion. We're recording this webinar for the LMS. And you can go back and listen to it as much as you want. You won't be able to download it for content, and we're not going to share the PowerPoint because it's protected and everything, but you can go back and look at this anytime you want, as much as you want. And I also want to thank everyone for filling out the question survey that we sent out earlier in the week. It was the one question, it was supposed to be easy. I know we had a few issues with it because of the Google nature of it. But it did help answer a couple questions for us. We thought we knew maybe what was maybe the biggest blockades and stumbling stuff for you guys, and it kind of answered that question. Mainly it was lack of time, which this will directly relate to, and lack of a staff, whether it's the amount of staff that you have or the quality of staff that you have. And hopefully this will help with that as well. There were a lot of other things, and every one of the categories got votes, but it was just those two were overwhelmingly more than the rest of them. So our vision for the day for this session, we're going to get to in just a second here, if this will advance, maybe. There you go. Our vision statement is promote leadership development and education. And we're going to do that through Peak Performance 2.0 with Dr. Robert Cooper. He is a neuroscientist and PhD with New York Times bestselling author and high performance business strategist. He serves as the CEO of Cooper Strategic, a global consulting firm drawing on peak performance database with nearly 2 million executive advisors and professionals. So I think you guys can read the rest. So I'm not gonna read that. But I first met Dr. Cooper and saw his presentation on peak performance. It was a lot smaller presentation. This is a lot larger, so I'll even get to learn a lot from today. At the Wall Covering Association's annual meeting earlier this year, way back in January, pre-COVID, so it was basically in the Stone Ages. And as relevant as it was then, it is even more valuable to our organization due to the training environments that exist today. So with that said, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Cooper.
Right, Dan, thank you. Hi, everyone. Let me see if I can switch. We'll switch to, see if I can share my screen right now. And we'll get this up and see if you're all with me. So you should see an opening screen, I'm guessing, on your view right now of where we're headed. I mean, first, it's an honor for me to be here with you. an intriguing time in the world, to say the least. It is a time when there are all kinds of people just waiting for it to be over. And, maybe the good old days, whatever those used to be, will come back. On the other hand, the most amazing leaders and teams and directors of training in the world are using this constraint, this challenge, to really think deeper, to step back and reinvent, in essence, how they deliver the most impactful results. How do they set records? And so then as the world shifts and we move into what's coming next, you'll have this chance to be better than ever. And what we notice, that these are my teams. We have 300 colleagues around the world who focus on different parts of what you'll experience with me today. I mean, what we realize is, this is this chance to step ahead, to break away from the norm in some really exciting ways. It creates a kind of line of hope for people. I mean, I think the noise right now, the commotion, the uncertainty, just the noise, the news, human beings, and my lens is through neuroscience. So human beings and the nervous systems are having a heck of a hard time today sorting, what to focus on, how to work remotely or, face-to-face in the right ways again, how to keep their priorities front and center, how can they be more relevant in a changing world, just to have the best future. How does that even work today? So I think the way all of us, and I'm in your world, so we design and deliver training and measure outcomes of all kinds around the world. And so to me, it's a really exciting time. I think the challenge is an igniter inside the human brain to ingenuity. And as long as you're curious, so the word curiosity in neuroscience, hugely important here. We call it the need for cognition, is the official phrase inside neuroscience, NFC. And it just means that there's a scratch inside you to wonder what is possible. Is there a better way to come at something? Have you been missing something? You're so close to it. Could you step back and put something in context? And it could really be a breakthrough where you save steps, you save time, you save effort. Your staff or your team, they raise their game in a way that it really helps you. Your training takes a shift. So in less time, you have even more significance, which is always a great hallmark of training that matters. So I did this design. I mean, we're afternoon East Coast time today as well. And I looked at, do we go deep? And Dan and Antoinette and Gavin and others on the team, Nicole, brainstormed with me and I with my team about how do we design this? Do we just pick one or two topics and go super deep on a couple of points? Or do we stand back and take a kind of journey for a couple of hours here, knowing that you'll have a chance in a few months also to be applying things, to share glimpses into what's improving. You could share some questions and we'll have a follow-up that we'll record that we can build on this. So that's pretty exciting. And that's also a great tool in terms of how the brain works. If the brain thinks something is a one-off, that if I endure this, it's over, it pays attention differently. So I want to both encourage you to make notes. You can ask questions. As Dan pointed out, if you can put them on the thread, that's great. If you just have to unmute and jump in, just jump in. I'm fine with that. But making notes changes how you learn. The human brain can hold about one Post-it note of information in active working memory, and everything else is overwhelmed. So we need to get way more things off our mind onto paper or in some other form of note making than we usually do. And so I just would encourage you to doodle, draw, circle, make a few notes. A pen in hand outperforms a keyboard. It outperforms thinking or just watching like this is a movie. So I would love to have you in it. And I'll have some questions. We'll work our way through that together. I want to start with a tool that we use around the world. We've used this for a long time, starting with 3M and Intel and a number of our clients. We call it a check-in, and it's a self-rating. So I want you thinking about, where are you right now? And we use this in every single program we teach. We have variations of this beyond energy and focus, but for this session, I want you thinking about, where are you right now on energy, 1 to 10. So a 10 would mean you have so much energy, you need a seatbelt. 1, it's a miracle you're upright. All right, so that's my range. Focus, 10, best imaginable. If there's something you're interested in, you are so ready to dial in, you'd be a 10. 1, why bother? You're barely here, underslept, whatever the story is. So pick 2 numbers. Where are you right now? I'm really curious about that. I want you to jot down 2 numbers or think 2 numbers. And I want you just to reflect on the significance of a tool this small And I would build a case that this set in motion some changes that have impacted some of the smallest record-setting teams in the world and the biggest organizations. Because to the brain, we mostly never check in. If you follow the best performers in the world in every single profession in the world, they've trained, they've embedded in their subconscious the ability all during the day to check in, where am I? And they sense from the moment they awaken in the morning and raise energy and focus, and we'll work on this together in a few minutes. They sense every time it starts to drop. And they have within reach a number of very small ways to raise it on the spot. And when you're around them, you're just thinking, how do they stay at this level of being dialed in and totally on, and they arrive ready for the next thing happening? And this is how. They have this awareness. They're walking around with a different awareness, where most people are just trying to make it through the day and avoid some kind of misstep. That's just the brain, the hardwired brain tends to go there. So checking in is a really interesting tool, and you could use it in training in a mix of ways. It tends to make people laugh a bit. They talk to each other. They often tease each other if they know each other. Like, you're not a 7, like I know you, like you're not that high. So we're judging each other's scores as well. But a check-in is a really powerful tool. And just taking the moment silently this afternoon for you to check in and just ask, where am I really? It causes your awareness to wonder, what might you have changed looking back with, what you ate, what you did, how you shifted gears, how you let go of something you were focused on to be here. What could you have changed? Back to curiosity. Now you have the opportunity to really grow and make things really work. So, moving on, I just want this theme in play during the session. Will and Ariel Durant had this quote in a series they wrote some years ago called The Lessons of History. And what they said was that the best future, not just the future, the best future never just happens. We don't just arrive and suddenly, it's the best possible future and we're here, how awesome. That's not the way human history plays out. The best future never just happens, it is created. So by how we train, by what we choose to focus on, by what we draw attention to, by what we follow through on, we are creating the best possible future. That's within reach of every one of us in more ways than we imagine. So I want to put that thought in play today. So when growing up, my dad was away a lot. He worked with a hospital ship Hope. My 2 grandfathers, I was the eldest grandchild, and they noticed that I was alone a lot. So they spent extra time with me. And my dad's dad, I'll come back to at the end of the session today. My mom's dad was a surgeon. My grandfather Downing was a surgeon who worked with the Mayo brothers. He pioneered surgery, helped a number of breakthroughs happen that have helped a lot of people in the world. And I grew up around him, and he would say to me when I was a little boy, he would say, we must become what we can become, and we don't. And they said the problem is, we get used to doing something and then we just perfect it. And so we actually stop developing new abilities. We stop unlocking this potential we all have, and we get stuck there. And he saw this in surgery. He saw people just repeating what they already do, maybe making it a little teeny bit better, but not making breakthroughs that save more lives. And what he knew was he wanted to be on that side of the equation. He wanted to pioneer and work on the breakthroughs that could help way more people. And it's a different way of coming at a profession. So I want the theme of we must become what we can become. And I'll build a case today. It's way more than what we see right now. We're underperforming. Good news is your competitors are underperforming too. So, that can be seen as a positive in its own way. So we work with a number of the top brands and have over the years in the world. You'll see a number of these logos that you potentially, recognize and maybe have done some work yourself with. And I'd build a case that every single one of these brands and many more that we work with, hundreds more, are reinventing themselves. If they're going to make this turn, they would want to be in a session like we're in today. They would want to take the latest leading edge research, the most practical tools. They would like to be constructively irritated, to look at something differently. That's what we're going to do together today. So I want you to reflect for a moment on a question. I think some of you had this, a day or two ago, just to think about a bit. And I'd love just a couple of quick reactions to this, but if you didn't have this question to ponder, it's fine. I just want to put it in your mind right now. But think back over the last month. Let's just take this last month of October. What is one thing, you might have many things, but pick one. What is one thing you've learned and applied that has measurably increased your effectiveness on top priorities? Not just you being more effective, but effective on the things that matter the most to you. They could be personal, or they could be work related. But what's one thing you've learned and you've applied that's made a measurable difference? So I'd love to have just a few responses here if we could. So you could unmute. I mean, Dan, I think that some of the participants had this question, a few of them at least, to share a thought.
Right. You guys can just unmute yourself and answer if you'd like.
Yeah, you could just jump in. Just identify yourself when you jump in so everyone else can know.
This is
I'll
Kevin
jump
Harnett
in
out of
there. It's
DC
Brian
58.
Gingroff. I'm FTI Ontario.
Okay.
I guess in the waning years of my working career, because I'm about to retire in a couple of months, has kind of made me sit back and think about, we prioritize every day, every hour, every minute almost, we're prioritizing. One thing I've never really, over the last 11 years, I can say that I've never put my personal life as a priority, unfortunately. So that's one thing I've tried to apply
Yeah.
is, taking the time to focus more on my personal life. I tend to stay at work way too long every night. And when you get home, there's no time left for anything else. So part of that is also trying to get my brain to turn off from work every day. I drive an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes each way. I find myself continuously, thinking about work, what issues we have, how to overcome some of the things, some of our obstacles, those kind of things. So it's all part of that is I can say over the last easily couple of months, I've tried to push myself away a little bit, at a certain time of the day to say, turn my computer off and go home. Because whatever's there is still going to be there tomorrow. I can thank my wife for part of this as well, because she's pushed me in that direction. But I think it's important. We probably all this is something we all need to think about.
Yes.
I know a lot of the directors of training personally. We all care and we care a lot. And I think sometimes we care too much at the detriment of our own personal lives.
Right. Well, thank you. No, and there's some soul searching there. You're right. And if you're not used to this for years, that switch to linking your personal well-being in it's something new to learn. So thank you. That was powerful.
I know when I was younger, I remember my father saying to me, as you get older, time goes by faster. Yes. And I used to laugh at him because that did not make any sense to me at all. Yeah. But I can tell you, it makes total sense. I mean, the days and the weeks and the months seem to be just clicking by anymore. Right. So I would encourage everyone to, take the time for yourself, take the time for your family, and, sure, work hard, do what you do every day, but, make sure you take the time to focus on yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that input. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Patty Byrne here, FTI BC.
Hey, Patty.
One thing that actually occurred here with me in the last month or so is we got a pretty close crew here, right? We're all we're friends. I mean, we get along well, and we do a pretty good job here. But I had to met out some discipline for one of the individuals that works here, right? And I realized that, you know what, maybe I was getting a little bit too comfortable with the friendship here and forgetting that sometimes you got to be the boss.
Yes.
And I had to discipline somebody at the facility here, right? And while it wasn't pleasant, it was necessary. And I think part of the reason why it got to that point was because we were getting a little too close. And you know what? Unfortunately, sometimes you're in these positions. As much as you want to be, friends with all the crew working for you, and you want to have that good relationship, you got to be the boss at some point, and otherwise, you wind up getting the lunatics running the asylum.
It's true, right? If life was meant to be a fan club, I think some of us missed that, announcement because you can't win that fan club if you're playing it all the way through. You just can't. And you're right. I mean, there are these moments when, as a leader, you need to step up, and there's clarity and there's confirmation that something needs to happen. And yeah, that's a great insight. And if you haven't done it a lot, it can be a turning point because the rest of the team's watching you too. And, it sends a very intriguing subconscious message that, we need to keep raising our game and we need to really be on. So yeah, thank you for that. That was great. Phil, did you have your hand in the air too?
Yeah, I hope you don't mind me reading this verbatim. It was more than would fit on a Post-it. So I wasn't able to memorize all of it. So yeah, I read your question. I read it and I wrote this down, and it's something I'm practicing right now. It's really important to me that someone know my name after I meet them, especially more than once.
Yes.
And then, kind of self-reflection. Am I doing the same thing? And it is important that someone remember your name. As trainers, as union officials, it's extremely important. And if you remember someone's name, you're instantly telling them that they're important to you.
Yes.
So how can I get better at that was my question. And because I don't have the greatest memory. So what I did was I started a logbook, and I would record the highlights of conversations that I would have with people, members, staff, neighbors, so that when future interactions, I can go back to that person's name, recall that conversation. And it may be something as simple as maybe they had mentioned their kid was in a sport and he was at a certain, rating. And I would recall that, and instantly that would create a persona to be able to segue into anything I want, because I've got his complete attention. He knows I'm paying attention to him, or they know that I'm paying attention to them. And that has been huge for me to be able to get from A to B with the different people.
That's awesome. Well, and Phil, we have a whole section coming up in this session together on the changes in trust and how we have to look at it differently. So this really fits that human beings have this real drive to be seen and to feel like they're unique. And you're right, it can be as simple as a name, and then other facts that really matter to them, often personally, that they might share with you. And that builds this bridge into just feeling seen and valued. So, simple thing, very powerful. So a couple more observations and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go. Mine kind of echoes what Brian was saying initially. This last month has been kind of a whirlwind for me. Over the summer, I found out I had a tumor in my kidney that they removed on October 2nd, found out it was cancer. So when you hear the C word, your whole world just absolutely changes. And it made me take a look at everything personally, professionally. Do I have enough life insurance to help support my wife if this would have progressed? And it would have, now luckily it isn't, and they got it all, but what would have happened professionally? Who's here to replace me if I couldn't have come back to work, if it would have been a lot more serious? So it really makes you think and put everything into perspective when you go through stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's its own kind of wake up call. It's so intriguing how, and we miss that. It's context about, do we have what matters most lined up with, what we're focused on? And sometimes we don't. And so that's a great reminder to all of us as well. So thanks for sharing that. That was great. Do we have one more?
Yeah, this is Dave Bertle with DC 36. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, I can.
Okay, perfect. Outstanding. I think it's just slow down. I think there's a little bit of everything that everybody's already talked about, that it plays parts in all of our lives, from slowing down at work to slowing down in your personal life, because like I think Brian hit it on the head, is, you just gotta, this job isn't everything. It means a lot to all of us, and you just gotta slow down, because next thing you're gonna turn around, there's not gonna be anybody there.
Yeah. No, and that's a great point, because the brain also needs more downtime. So the slowing down, I mean, it's so intriguing. We all grew up in a world where this notion was, to really be successful, you have to push, push, push. And amazing how much of what grows us happens when we slow down. Brain downtime, hugely important. The top athletes in the world know it, top, military units in the world know it, but others don't. And so we end up pushing. And so I think that's another great awareness point that we'll build on this afternoon. So, thank you for that as well. So if you also thought about this, these are great questions. Like this are really important for a mix of reasons. And we use questions a lot. We often pre-engage with them ahead of a training with questions. We follow up with questions because reflecting changes the brain in real time. It makes us stretch to become what we can become, as opposed to what we call cognitive tunneling, where we just end up doing what we do. We do more and more of less and less, and we're comfortable at it. We're good at it. We can work long hours at it. We're maybe not really highly effective at it, and it might not be the most important things anymore. But if we don't have a way to see that or sense that, we're stuck. So I want to move on, but I wanted to plant that seed. And part of why I wanted to plant that seed, I just finished last year a second PhD, which only people I think that forgot how hard the first one was, or any kind of degree, would ever do a second one. But I wanted to do some original research, and this happened to be at the #1 university in the world in this field. And I wanted to look at where learning meets initiative, because I'll build a case that learning itself doesn't change us. I mean, just being exposed to information, watching things, being in a session, there's hardly any evidence at all that the brain changes at all. We don't really become more. We check a box, we attended something, and our teams and our original data would say that it's in the application. It's when you take something and make it your own, because we're each one of a kind. I mean, that's diversity played out, is we're all one of a kind, unique human beings, and unlike anyone else in the world. And we all want to be seen that way and respected that way. And we want to have a voice that way, and we want to be able to grow that way. So, but we have to take initiative. So we build this out together. So I want you thinking during this session today with me, in what new ways could you link learning with application, just more often and briefer than maybe you do it now. It's a really powerful thing. So applied learning, we now know, changes the brain in micro moments, in millionths of a moment. When you start applying something or wondering, how could I use this with this team on this objective, and what could I adjust or change in a very small way, we become different. The brain actually becomes younger. It can stretch, it can switch. It's so powerful as a tool. Results that come out of learning plus initiative or learning plus application. This is one data cut of teams we measure that we call elite teams, the ones that have leaned into the kinds of things you're learning today. And then we measure outcomes week by week across the time frame of a year, for example, in lots of leaders and teams. And just notice the differences here in energy and engagement, in learning and productivity and creativity. So much higher than what we would consider a traditional successful team. And it just will raise the point that so much more is possible than we think is possible. So this is where we're headed today. This is the outline that I've worked through with Dan and the team as well. We'll start with, how do you guide in simple, different ways, what we call your brain performance code. Then we'll focus the second areas on redesigning time. How do you look at time? Because the survey also indicated it just feels like we're out of time. We have no bandwidth left. We have no flexibility left. We're just really working. And all of you are can-do driven, right, achievers. So that's awesome. And that's also the downside. I mean, if you didn't have stamina, you'd be stopping sooner. So we have to look at that. What is the latest on redesigning time? Third area, update, trust, and communication. Right? How do you think differently? Because the whole world is changing about what it takes to build trust. How do we communicate in ways that create trust and loyalty in our own teams, and how we work with other human beings as well? And then finally, just a few insights on new data on how do you achieve bigger goals sooner? Could be a goal with training. It could be a goal, with a project. It could be a goal, inside the profession that each person's lined up with. So those are the 4 broad areas we'll focus on. So I want to start with this notion of your brain performance code. So I would build a case that we each arrive in this world with a hardwired brain that mostly is exactly the same as it was, say, 2,000 years ago. Maybe more than that, but 2,000 years ago. The way it reacts to the negative, the way that it leans away from change, the way it seeks comfort. Those things helped humanity a couple thousand years ago. I mean, they helped us survive all kinds of things. They don't fit today's world. So I'd build a case that if you just let your brain mostly run your life, what it wants to do is not what's often best for you. It's not what's possible for you. The brain always tends to play small. It leans back, it nitpicks, it amplifies the negative. You can see it out there right now in the noise and the news. And so I would encourage you, like we do with our teams and all our clients around the world, just work on how could you become more of a guide for your own brain in the right ways across the day. And this cartoon was drawn in our neuroscience lab by Hugh McLeod. It says your brain is not your friend. And it's the saying we have. And what we mean by that is your brain in general is a great employee. It's a terrible boss. Like, don't turn it loose. It has these reactions that it thinks are helping us, but it overwhelms us with negativity. It makes us narrow in on the wrong, miss the important things. Trivia distracts us endlessly, shiny objects. We lean away from change. I mean, we maybe wear an I love change pin or something. We're part of a campaign to change, but the brain itself doesn't want to do any of that unless we nudge it. So how in training can we do the right things that help us take charge of the brain? Rick Hansen, a neuroscientist, one of his comments that I've loved for a while is, our brain has a negativity bias, which is true. So we really are drawn to the negative and we amplify it. We minimize positive. He says, which makes it like Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good, right? And it's that drive home that we just heard about a few minutes ago, where if you have a long commute, chances are if 100 things went right on a day and one went slightly wrong, what you're going over and over on is the one thing that went slightly wrong. And that's just natural. We're hardwired with that tendency, and we're the ones that have to override it. It will not end on its own. So into this complexity, there are all kinds of mental models out there in the world. You've heard about a number of them. They're way more than just 200 here. There's more than 700. We call them brain traps, but they're cognitive or emotive biases and stumbling blocks. And so we're set up to have all of these challenges around us, and we're the ones that have to step in and start guiding the way the brain works. The phrase we use for our uniqueness is neuroindividuality. Every single human being is one of a kind. And the reason a lot of books and programs don't work, they work for someone, is that we're different and we're not testing and tailoring. So we really emphasize, how do you make this your own, which is my nudge for you with the insights from today. How do you test and tailor these? Some could fit you. You'll have to adapt them though for the project you're working on, but you can do this. And in the end, this is where the whole world's headed. There's also an issue with this whole notion of good to great. And there was a saying from 100 years ago by a famous entrepreneur that good and great are the enemies of possible. And his name was Martin Henry Leland. And that saying is really true to us. That we get good at something, we just want to repeat it. We stretch and someone gives us an award and they say, hey, you're great. What we tend to do is what grew us to great stops, and now defending great, clutching the trophy begins, and then we fall. It's the history of businesses, of societies. It's just in every human being. And so my grandfather, as a little boy, would say to me, be really grateful when someone says you're amazing at something, soak it in for about 10 seconds, and then ask, what's deeper? What's next? What's more? And that stretch toward what's possible, because so much more is possible than all of us can even imagine yet. And we're proving it in science, we're proving it in human performance every single day. I mean, the data is really powerful. So what we don't realize is how ineffective human beings actually are. And here's one data cut, there are many, but this one data cut said, first it said on average, only 11 minutes out of the working day have peak effectiveness in human beings in general. Now this wouldn't be each of you, of course, you're dazzling, but human beings in general, highly ineffective. Then they did a second take on the data and the number went down to 8 minutes a day. And so if they're only 8 minutes when in an entire 8-hour or more working day, we are really on, we're really dialed in. How do we work those 8 minutes and leave? I mean, how do I get all 8 minutes together? Or how do I change this? And the reason this happens is the busy brain compares itself to what's common, not what's possible. So as long as you feel a little bit faster or more effective than the people around you, I'm speaking through your brain here, your brain's pretty proud of you. I mean, you might even be Olympic, right, to your brain. And so this notion of how much upside is there? Like how much more effective could we get? We could get much more effective. Part of what is driving the brain crazy today, we call in neuroscience present shock. It's the endless distractions, interruptions, just the shiny objects, the things that pull us away from having any momentum on priorities. And it's not going away. I mean, just the sheer number of times that people look at their devices during the day, those numbers are going up and up and up. And so what that means, and we'll get to it in a little while here, is communication now is compressing. We have to front end messages, give you the conclusion first to keep you engaged. We have to know where things are headed, or we unplug, we disconnect. And so present shock, we don't have to like it. It is a reality in today's world. I don't see it going away. Another twist that's really interesting is it's valuable to know for each of us, our talents and our strengths is valuable. The problem with a hardwired brain is once it understands what you uniquely are strong at, your own brain tends to entrench those strengths and then just start inflicting them. Like, don't mess with me. These are my strengths. I do these things. You do other things. And in that rigidity, you actually block your ability to pick up new abilities and to become what you can become. So strengths are both a blessing and a barrier. And if we see that in training, It's why we want to keep handing to unique human beings. How could you test and tailor this? And it might be a brand new ability, which feels awkward to the brain at first. And we have to make peace with being uncomfortable. So could we start small? How could we test this and just see if we look at an outcome? How is this better? So that really pays off. So strengths are valuable. They can be an issue. When you're around people leaning into growing, we call this upwiring. They're changing in front of our eyes. They listen deeper. They're open-minded. They stay curious. Downwiring is the opposite. It's repeating the way you always do what you do, the way you feel, the way you react, the way you think. And you'll hear people say things like that. It's just the way I am. That's a sign of someone downwiring, right? And they're stuck. They're just stuck in time, and the world is leaving them behind as it changes. So all of us, as we're designing training and we're working with human beings, we want to be growing and rising. And the news in biology is nothing can stay the same. Nothing. Not one cellular process, not one cell, not any part of you. You're either growing in some way or you're fading, right? You grow or die. I mean, that's exactly what's happening inside all of us. And so I want you upwiring. Upwiring is just one of the terms that we use. The right question, the brain loves big and complicated and later and sometimes never. And to take action, what you want to be focused on more, because this is where many of the best breakthroughs happen, is they're very small adjustments in something. It's a very small change. So you continually ask, where might or where can the smallest change, not the biggest one, the smallest one make the biggest difference? And when you ask it in the spirit of what do your best instincts say? And the other person maybe hadn't thought about this. And so now they're scanning the challenge or the setting, and they're starting to think. Their instincts are getting sharper. So what's happening is in this kind of interchange, when you're looking for leverage here, where might the smallest change make the biggest difference? You're encouraging other people to sense that too. And often those small changes are within reach, and we make them, and then we grow. We call this the habit of winning. And we were asked by a leading organization in the world to come up to look at the simplest habit that the best leaders in the world and teams walk around asking every single day. What's that habit? And we call it the habit of winning. And basically you're aiming everything. Where does this lead? And if it doesn't lead someplace you want to go, don't focus on that. So this has to be a priority. Then you test something. What's a small change that might make a bigger difference? Whatever works, you keep, you share it with other people, you grow, and you repeat this again. You aim again at one of your top priorities. And this little sequence of aiming and then testing some adjustment or change to become more than you were a moment ago, a day ago, a class ago, when you design something, that's what separates the best performers in the world from everyone else. When you do this, you awaken in the brain some special kinds of neurons. The nickname for them are breakthrough and solution neurons. And what that basically means is every single time you pilot test a small change, or someone in your classes does, it's changing them. These neurons wake up. All human beings have them, and most human beings, they don't work. They're dormant. But when you're testing small adjustments and changes, and you're basically looking for daylight, how can I improve this? How could I save a step here? How could I be better over here? These neurons wake up, and they make you much quicker at finding and creating breakthroughs and solutions. So it's very cool. It starts to become the way you do things. And that's an outcome I love from training, is you just take it with you. One more insight you might not have heard about from the data that we find really interesting is, we grew up in a world where a lot of people would say, just take one thing from the session, just one thing, just walk out the door with one thing. And I'm here to tell you, don't, right? The human brain and nervous system have a really hard time implementing one change. So I'm thinking habit changes here. And in this case, it's way easier for the brain to take a handful of small changes that it could work on because they spark each other. It keeps your subconscious curious about when and where to start applying some adjustments. So a handful of small changes taken away from learning, be my request as we head toward the end of the session today also. What handful of small changes are your instincts saying, I should test these? They might help me, right? So go for a handful, not just one, and they'll help you, they'll play off each other. So that was a little look at some of the ways you can start to guide the way your brain, when it takes off on its own, would not guide you in the best way. How could you insert some influence and give a nudge? And you're turning the way your brain focuses in a way that's really helpful. Second area, we'll jump into that, and then we'll come back. Go, yeah, jump in, go.
Yeah, so I was curious. I know we talked about this in the past, and I saw another piece of this somewhere else. How much does failure, help in your succeeding and stuff? I mean, it's important to
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, failure is interesting because we call it, so 3M called failure stumbles, right? It could be a setback. It could be an outright failure. It could just be an oversight or a mistake. We all tend to feel bad about those to begin with. We call those fuel, right? In our neuroscience research, the best performers in the world use the energy of a stumble to look deeper at something. The most elite performing military units, we have jet fighter pilot commanders, on our team as well. And when they debrief after something that didn't go well, they're so fast at extracting learning. They don't beat themselves up. They learn from it. And I'll actually come back to this a little bit later in this segment on, trust and what's changing. How can we and how we work with each other get better at that? So the truth is, if you're not daring to test changes, and some of them won't work, right? And so, but that discomfort and some of those stumbles and some of those failures, they open up a whole nother opportunity. And you'll see this. I mean, there's a great set of studies in the world about just how the most successful people in the world, none of them had it easy. I mean, they all came through all kinds of challenges and setbacks, and they had to turn things around, and they had to look deeper, and they had to really call on the best part of themselves. So we see that. We want you to avoid failures when you can, right? To be ahead of where you are. That's really important. And be your best self. So if you keep arriving ready, as opposed to you're exhausted, you're distracted, I mean, that really sets you up to stumble more, to have more challenges. But if you've done those things, to arrive really being dialed in and being ready, you can extract learning from something that's not going well. You can do it pretty fast. So hopefully, Dan, that helped. Anything else come up that we should address so far? All right, apparently we're good. All right, so redesign time. So this whole notion, the brain has a really hard time with time, which probably won't surprise you, right? Calendars and time, we're under 400 years in human history, we've had those clocks. And the brain is not good at managing time. So we have to be the ones, again, who add some structure, who test and tailor the ways to get the most out of time. So we have teams that work, Navy SEAL team members on these teams, jet fighter pilots and others that work on an initiative we have called Precision Plus Speed. That when you want to get better, you always focus on precision first, getting the right things really done well, and then the speed follows. And we have a formula we use. The first two steps are anticipate. So whenever you can, anticipate what's coming. Tonight, anticipate tomorrow, right? It's called being preemptive, hugely important. Second part of this, though, that's a hallmark of the best performers in the world is all across the day, based on how they organize their time and schedule, they arrive ready for the next meeting, the next call. I mean, they're in essence totally on. You could feel the level of engagement they have compared to everyone else. I mean, you'll feel them in a meeting, being more dialed in, more attentive, more curious, making better notes, more geared toward follow through. So they're not only anticipating some things are coming that really matter in today's calendar, for example. And sometimes we get surprised. I mean, Dan, back to that question on failures, and something surprises us and we have to deal with it in real time, for sure. But arriving ready, a lot of the time we can get much better at how we do that. So I wanted to highlight that here for just a moment. And the way we build this, there's a phrase we've used for years called Apex Operating System. And I would build a case that every one of us should have had a class, probably preschool. This is probably preschool class, just for a moment, where people said to us, let's say I'm in preschool many years ago, right? And someone looks at me and says, look, Robert, I'm like anyone who's ever lived in this world, and we'll help you with this. But one of the things you're going to need to do as you grow up is you're going to have to figure out this way that from the moment you awaken first thing in the morning until you fall deeply asleep at night, what do you do when? You uniquely, what do you do when that gives you your best energy, your best focus, your best resilience, you're the most creative, you're your best, you're unlocking your best possible self. All of your potential, your ability to learn, your ability to absorb information quickly. And then you work your entire life on making it better. We would call this an Apex Operating System, a blueprint. So all of us on this session would have arrived then at this session living today in a blueprint. So from the moment you went to sleep last night, right before that, what did you do to prime your subconscious for today? You awaken, what did you do in the opening minutes to upgrade your brain and metabolism to be at your best? And then what did you schedule when it's within your control? Exactly. And we would have this. Elite performers in the world have these. These are blueprints. They build them, they make them better. I'll share some highlights in a moment. We'll touch on this together. And I build the case this is coming as something every human being needs to be at our absolute best, have the greatest opportunities, live our best life. We need this and we don't have it. We're winging it. And that's not a great thing. So this is one example of a real macro view of some things across the day for one elite performer. What do they do when? And within this are specific plans. What are they doing in the middle of the day to get the most out of their brain for the afternoon? How do they start their day? How do they make transitions during the day? How do they engage as they move from the mindset of working into the mindset of being at home? How do they wind down at the end of the day in a way that gives the brain downtime, that sets them up to have really deep sleep and recovery and high energy and connect with their families and their loved ones and their community differently and better? How do they do it? So there's a method to this. So we'll focus on Apex Operating System for a moment. So you may have heard that, there's this whole call, there are a number of books out on this, that at a specific time every morning, apparently, all the successful people in the world get up at that particular time, right? The alarm goes off and they outperform everybody. And there are books on this, there are plans for this, there are all kinds of ways to look at this. And I'm here to tell you scientifically, it's absolute garbage. It's just absolutely wrong, right? Harvard expert just says it's a performance killer. There is no specific time when any of us should be up in the morning, except the time that's best for us individually. Now, maybe for me, I'm actually a real early morning. The way that my unique chronobiology, the way that I'm wired, the way it works for me is I need to be up a little bit earlier than other people in my family, my wife, our daughters. Just that's been me my whole life. It's not most people. And so you have to figure that part out on your own. So when does your day start? That's very personal. But once your day starts, then what? Right? And what's interesting in how the brain works is from the moment it awakens in the morning, we give it signals, right? We are the signalers to our own brain from the moment we awaken in the morning. And evolutionarily, this was huge, right? 2,000 years ago, your brain is listening to you. If you're uptight, you're hearing some sound outside, the brain is dampening down energy production, assuming you might have to flee for your life later. But there are all these signals, right? The brain's waiting for you. You and I missed this announcement as we grew up. We're the signalers. So we should have an actual plan. We're signaling our own brain. So what is that plan? And from the moment you awaken, there's this cortisol awakening response. The brain is deciding, do I make more energy all day in the body too, or less, based on these signals? And think of how many people awaken in the morning. As late as they can, they jump out of bed to a loud alarm clock, drink an entire pot of coffee themselves. It would have killed our ancestors. They barely tremor. Amazing. Then they rush. If they're still going somewhere in traffic on a long commute, they might drive a little too fast. That gives a kind of rush. We call it tense energy. All those things are the wrong signals. Can we get used to them? Yes. Are the people around us doing those things? Sure. So compared to them, we might feel like we're performing well, but we're not. So if we unlock in every one of us, what would be the best way to awaken in the morning? It's the first 21 minutes, right? Really powerful. That number, I think, is compressing. We started with 1 hour, and my teams look at the data from around the world. We keep asking, what's the least amount of time on average we think most of us could organize a way that we're sending the right signals and our performance goes up dramatically. We're down to 21 minutes. I think it's going to drop below 21 minutes here pretty soon. That's exciting. So I want to give you a few examples for a moment, just to spark your thinking. And there are all kinds of these. So I'm not suggesting these are all right for you, but some of them may be right for you. So how do elite performers in the world start their day? And once you do it, you'll track how you feel. And how does your family like you or friends later in the day? If they like you better, good sign. Maybe this is really paying off for you. So there are all kinds of ways to measure this, right? First, the first 21 minutes, no access to TV, radio, email, or the internet, none, right? None. Those hijack the brain out of the gates. And the fire department, if they come, will still knock on your door. They won't call you, probably. It's going to be a different way to find you. So in general, just try not to be immersed in the distracting and mostly negative technology early in the morning. Sip an entire glass of water. The nervous system needs more fluid first thing in the morning. Bring your faith, whatever that is, with you. So you're living, and just remember it for a moment. That's Dr. Renee Shake's research. Your goals. Up to 70% of achieving big goals depends on daily recommitment. So first thing in the morning, you're just running through your mind. This is my handful of top goals, and I'm in. I'm excited about them. I'm recommitting to them. moving on. I mean, viewer light, step someplace where you get a view and you could turn the lights up. Step into another room, turn some lights on. If it's dark outside, if the sun's coming up, step outside for a moment. That changes through the eyes, the energy production that you have. Work up to not intaking caffeine for 15 minutes to an hour after awakening. And the reason is, if you're drinking coffee or caffeinated beverage right away in the morning, you're blunting your own nervous system's ability to make energy. So just put a little lag in there. I mean, 1 minute's better than 2 seconds or something. I mean, just stretch it out, see what you can do. You can learn. Your position matters to your brain in the morning. So just be up. Don't slouch and shuffle. Just be up. Breathe a little deeper than you might normally breathe. Those are signals to the brain, really powerful. Have at least a few sips of ice cold water. So have a way you can reach for some ice cold water, nearby first thing in the morning. Those sips rev metabolism. They give you more energy. If you take a shower in the morning, there's a whole lot of new research coming out, very intriguing on it's called exposure training. And work up to having 30 seconds or so of super ice cold water at the end of a shower every single time. And it helps your immune system, keeps you younger. I mean, it changes us in some really powerful ways. So just test it, see what might work for you with that. A bite or two of food within the first 21 minutes, this is MIT research, can connect through the neurotransmitter stomach to the brain. It can help produce more energy. That's super positive and powerful. Ask a couple of questions. So priming is setting up your subconscious to do something. So you're basically ahead of time, you're lighting up neural pathways. So it helps you remember to pay attention subconsciously to something. So you don't have to focus on it later on. You feel this nudge, like a gut instinct. I should notice something, or there's something over here. Questions like, what will I learn today? How will I innovate today? And then how will I use it? Notice I'm going back to linking learning plus initiative. How will I use it today? Fitness, make sure you're not flexing your lower back. This is Dr. Stuart McGill's research out of Canada, deep, thorough, really, really high level research. No spinal flexion, no bending at the waist for about an hour after you awaken or you're injuring your lower back. And we didn't know that until not too long ago. Simple advice, best exercise early in the morning, according to Dr. McGill, push-ups, planks, push-ups on your knees, one arm, both arms against the wall, whatever kinds of push-ups you do, that's fine. It keeps the core stable. And it's a good signal. It's not a workout, but it's a good signal, make more energy to the brain as well. And now you scan your priorities. So first 21 minutes, any of these could help. And now you're starting to set yourself up to have better and more energy all day long. Then there's a focus prime time. Every single one of us as human beings, there's one time during the day when we ace things. What is your time of day, right? I mean, is it early in the morning, like for me, like early morning, middle of the morning, and when your family would have an opinion? What is your best natural time of day? When you're the most naturally on for focusing on things. And we all have one of these. Everyone on your team has one of these. So what's yours? And the reason you want to know is this should be in a different color on your calendar. And on the days when you can control this particular time, when you don't have to be somewhere else, schedule to work on your highest priorities, right? Because you are 2 to 100 times more effective in this prime time than at any other time of the waking day, right? And the brain, as you focus, and as we focus, you'll see it in how we're doing this today. We're not staying very long on one topic on purpose. By design, the brain is designed for sprints. It's designed for 5 to 10 minute, maybe less than 5 minute sprints of focus, and then a change. It's how we're designed. And that whole idea of working super long hours, we tend to be really ineffective. We need to be switching up focuses. So I could focus for 5 minutes on one priority, wrap that up, then turn to another priority. I can come back to the first one, but just don't go nonstop, right? So that switches things up for the brain, really a powerful tool. After every one of these brief bursts of focus, use 2 4-letter words. I mean, this is what the research would teach us. I mean, when you finish a focus area, the brain needs to fully disengage, and it doesn't tend to do it. One of the biggest barriers to full engagement is we don't fully disengage. So when you finish one focus, for right now, use the word done. Think it, or if you're alone, you can say it out loud if you want. Take this breath and recharge. And as you turn to what's ahead, use the word next. And that tends to shift the brain into focusing in. So very simple research, very powerful kind of an outcome. We used to think breakfast was the most important meal of the day. I mean, it's still important. We now know from a brain perspective, lunch is the most important meal of the day. So the ability to make sure everybody is getting at least a few bites of food, whatever works the best for them, really important. And nutrition, a topic, we can certainly go deeper into, as well. I mentioned earlier, just the brain needs more downtime. And we're going to take a short break coming up at the top of the hour as well. If there are enough of you that want to do that, we'll have Dan, kind of make a decision on that. But the brain literally needs to unfocus more than we tend to unfocus. And here's part of the reason why. When I grew up, we thought the brain uses most of its energy when we actually focus on things. And that's what's tiring. And the answer is that's actually not true. Unfocused, right? When the brain unfocuses on something, steps back, a whole other set of networks in the brain kick in. We absorb learning. We integrate what we know. We start to focus on ways to apply it. But if we're just doing only, and we're not stepping back and unfocusing some, so it's like when we end this session today, how do we wind down at the end where you can absorb more learning? I mean, you take this breath before you jump into checking email and doing the next things. I want to jump ahead to how do you wind the day down? Just a couple of thoughts. There are all kinds of tools here on winding the day down, and we don't do this well either as human beings. We're often tired, to one of the earlier comments that we had here. We get home, we're tired. We're up later, we're tired. We fall asleep in a chair maybe, or on the sofa. Someone nudges us, says, go to sleep. You're sleeping, that kind of feeling, not great. So we need to plan the end of the day differently. A number of ways to do it. There are all kinds of tools here, but I just want to focus for a moment on reflection. When we look back at what happened during the day in a constructive way, it changes us, right? So just reflecting back on the day, you already in the morning said, I wonder what I'm going to learn today. How am I going to innovate? How do I apply learning and innovation? Now you're reflecting back. How did that work? What did I learn today? How did I use it? Where did I innovate? Even on something really small, right? What was something exceptional that I did? It could be small again, or that someone else did. I want to remember those things. The negative I can remember, the mistakes, but I want to emphasize these. They help bring out the best in me. And this is Dr. Anise Shaik's research as well from Marquette University. Take a few moments every evening to vividly imagine and feel. Don't just count your blessings. Vividly imagine and feel your blessings. We all have a lot of blessings, and we tend to forget them and remember the irritations and the distractions. Not a great way to wind the day down. So just soaking in the things we have to be thankful for, really important. To sleep for just a couple of minutes here as well. This is a really important focus area. The data would say one bad night's sleep weakens your brain's memory, performance, and creative powers. And a lack of that downtime and high quality sleep, biggest reasons people make mistakes and miss chances to learn, improve, and innovate. So here we are, we're running training for people. And part of the larger context should be, we should be the best reminders of the science that says, look, what we're focusing on learning, we want you to absorb. We want you to make it your own because you'll be better. And just pay some attention also to getting enough rest. Keep testing. How could you rest even deeper? Because it will help you. And there's more and more education coming on this. We'll build it into the ways we train. I think that's super positive. There's also technology. So there's a company.
Dr. Cooper?
Good. Yeah, go.
Let's stop there, take a short break, and we'll come back because I know that a lot of our guys and gals suffer from sleep issues.
Awesome.
So maybe we can dive into that when we get back.
Let's do it. So let's take 5 minutes right now. So feel free to just, if you would time this for me. So it's like a mission timer. If you would time it, we'll be back online here in 5 minutes together and we'll continue. So thanks everyone. Dan, thanks.
Thanks, Kurt. Be back at 3:06 or 2:06 or whatever timeline you're on. Dave and Phil both had their hands up. Let's go with Phil since Dave doesn't seem like he's back yet. Phil, did you have something?
Hey, Phil.
No, I believe that my hand was up from my last time.
Oh, sorry, I missed you.
Okay.
You weren't on my screen, sorry.
So Dan, whenever you're ready, you just give me the green light here and we'll go.
Yeah, we're good, I think. So you can go ahead. Like I said, I just wanted to make sure that they had time because I know, been around it for so many years that I think it's an issue with construction workers, period, and definitely trainers have a problem with sleep. So
no, it's great, and we'll come back. We're going to do some reflecting back in just a moment, a couple of slides from now, together with a new tool also. And And you can tell, I mean, we've opened up, this is a whole gamut of new discoveries in neuroscience and scientific fields like chronobiology, cycles of time, and how they affect the brain and performance and our well-being and all of those sort of dimensions of who we are as human beings and what we're capable of becoming. This influences those a lot. And it's amazing how many hundreds of new studies are being published every week. And what we look for, our team is really good at looking for practical insights. And, a lot of those discoveries are upending conventional thinking. So we used to think we needed to do, if we do the opposite, sometimes it's much better. And so it's worth being aware of that. We love being at that leading edge with our teams. I mean, it's an exciting thing. So sleep, again, there's so much going on. So think of that focus, unfocus slide that we looked at together, that while we're sleeping, the brain consolidates memories, cleanses toxins out of the entire system, rejuvenates us, absorbs learning in new ways, just makes us more capable in the morning or not. So depending on the quality of the sleep, the deep sleep we have, the REM sleep or don't, the REM sleep we have or don't, how restful or restless we are, how long we sleep in a certain extent, in our body temperature, our heart rate variability, all those things we can measure now while we're sleeping. And you can learn from that. You can learn what kinds of things set you up in the evening to have the deepest possible sleep and rest. And there's just so many ways that plays out. There was a study published 2 days ago that said, 50% of unwanted thoughts that distract people and negative thinking and doubts and that just bottle us up, they're all sleep debt accentuated. So when we're not sleeping well, we can't even block those. They just start to take us over. So now we're battling even more things that are unnecessary. And so the ability to just free up this best part of who we are, sleep plays a big role in that. So I wanted to bring you into the technology of sleep a little bit. And we've been around this for a long time. We participate in the research. We have tools. You'll notice the new Apple Watches, coming out have more and more ability to measure sleep, and all kinds of other devices, the wearables that you could put on. But there's one that I'll mention that's really interesting. It's from a company in Vancouver, Fatigue Science. And Fatigue Science looks at performing athletes, elite military units around the world, and it can measure based on wearing this Ready Band, this very thin band while you sleep. It can not only calculate what's happening while you're sleeping, how you're recovering or not, it can predict. So this is predictive analytics. It can predict your day tomorrow. And for everyone where safety and precision is really important, elite military units, athletes, I mean, it could be construction workers too, where we want safety to be huge. We want to be on, we want to be highly effective. These predictive analytics are really, really important. So I'll show you this is one of my screens from a year ago, but it was measuring my brainwave state, when I'm waking up out of 100. And the case that Fatigue Science would make is most people, when they're coming to work in a traditional way, are in the 70s, 60s or 70s. And it's like they are working or living drunk and they haven't had a drink. That's just the brain level. But we don't even know it. We're so used to it. The people around us are in the same mode. But we can actually start to measure. And on sports teams and in military units, your band is scanned every time you walk into a locker room or a staging area. So you can't hide. I mean, what's happening for you, you're signing up, you're part of this. They get to looking at you too. If you look at my scale on the right here, I'm in a real high brainwave state for most of this day. You see it below in the timeline, but at 2 in the morning, you don't want me on your team, right? That's not going to be a time you want me on the mission with you. We're doing something. And just the fact, if you could know these things, you start to adjust what you're doing to have higher scores. And so Fatigue Science is coming in a mix of ways. It's available in rings. There's an Aura ring. My wife Leslie and I and our team members wear those as well when we sleep. Pretty easy because you get data. You just have a way to look at, okay, that adjustment we made in the evening really helped us rest much more deeply, and you'll feel it in your performance. So I want to take just a moment here and share a couple of highlights on what does it take based on the latest research to sleep truly deeply and well, to rest and recover at the highest level. And so these are data points, and we're all individuals, so you may be different than some of these. But the zone right now that just seems ideal for human beings in general is 7 to 8 hours. Way more than 8 hours, not really helpful. Maybe some more for some people. a lot less than 7 hours for most people, not enough rest and recovery for the brain. You also want to sleep dark. We're designed to not have any light. I mean, even a night light on, or if there's, you know, some light coming in from outside through a window, around a curtain, around a blind, that's enough to cause excessive rapid eye movement, even with your eyes closed, and it disrupts deep sleep. So to the degree you can, go as dark as you can, right, in the sleeping area. That's important. I mean, optimize your sleep space. I mean, the bed you use, the pillow, the bedding that you pick, whatever seems the most restful to you. And it's worth testing a few things when you can, just to find what seems to help you rest the best. You want to sleep in a room that's quiet, but you also want to block sound. So this is some new research that's interesting to me, is the sound machine world, that you need some white, pink, brown noise, or all kinds of types of noise. But just because it blocks the outside, you know, sound of sirens or traffic, or excuse me, dogs barking, and all those things disrupt sleep. You might not fully wake up, but it pulls you out of deep rest, out of deep sleep and deep REM sleep. You want to sleep colder than you think. We grew up in a world where warmer was actually better, more covers was better. And the new data again and again is just saying we need to sleep more Arctic. You want the room way colder than you typically would have it. You need less covers than you typically would have if you want to have deep rest. So it doesn't mean you jump into an ice cold bedroom like in one night, but you just ease your way into this. And the reason is metabolism goes up higher, the brain's making more energy, it's recovering better, you're resting deeper. So we were designed for colder temperatures when we sleep. A Mayo Clinic research would say, don't have a clock in view in your bedroom. There should be no clocks that you can see in your bedroom. Just turn them around. And the reason is, if you have a clock in view, you will awaken maybe 100 times a night unconsciously. You won't even remember it in the morning, maybe, except your neck is stiff to check the time. So you could have a clock with an alarm, just turn it around so you're not staring at time. And then some new data, really interesting, that if you're a back sleeper or a stomach sleeper, for example, you want to maybe start by sleeping on trying to fall asleep on your side. And the reason is, somehow for the brain, being on the side when you're in that position, a side sleeping position, it cleanses toxins and rejuvenates the brain way faster. So I'll leave this right there on sleep for the moment. And what I want to do for the next moment here is use a reflection tool that's from new research that you could use in your training, really powerful. And you could use it, we could have used it way more often, but I wanted to lead up to this point. We'll do it again later. But we call it a 10-second leap. And the leap comes from my team linking learning plus application. But it comes from research that suggests, and this is really interesting, that the fastest learning comes when you build in more moments to reflect. And so we'll have a couple of these during this training session. I think ultimately where this will go, and I debated doing it for this session, but I think it's better that I can share this with you, and you can test it on your own as well, the way we do, is maybe every 20 to 30 minutes, you could drop in one of these reflective pauses. And when you do it, you want to train two things. So two things happen in these pauses. The first thing is you just let your brain, without even having to read your notes, you scan back. What did we just cover? And what stood out to me? So where we've come in the last hour here is we've had, the brain performance code. We looked at some ways to nudge the brain and get ahead of it a bit from doing what it wants to do. And then we looked at redesigning time, starting with how we awaken in the morning, first 21 minutes. We worked through a few of the tools with time, and then how we ended the day, and then with some sleep and rest. Of those main points, we emphasize what stood out to you as potentially valuable, either to you personally or you related to some kind of training. Just pick one. So that scan is something the brain can do really, really fast. And then you want to ask, once you pick something that stood out, like this is something I'd like to test, or I sense maybe this could work. You don't have to know that it will, but it might. How, when, and where will you apply it? Right? How would you pilot test this in a program coming up, on your, with your family tonight, when you wake up in the morning tomorrow, or on Monday with a meeting coming up next week? When and where and how could you see if this works? Those two quick questions, and they will end up happening way faster than in 10 seconds. The research said it takes 10 seconds. That's maybe, a good learning framework of time. But with a little bit of practice, it'll happen in a second or less for the brain. It will scan back fast. It will instinctively sense where you might use it. That's all it takes. And recall an application. This last data point is really interesting to me. Recall an application when you use this tool they increase by up to 300%. So it's the first time data has looked at this pacing of how we learn. So we not only have Q&A time, can we each also reflect back over what did we just cover in the last half hour or hour? What stood out to me? How might I use it? And now I'll look ahead. That's a 10-second leap. That's as powerful as this is. So I want each of you just thinking back over what we've covered so far together in this session today. What has stood out to you as something worth making a note on, paying some attention to, testing? And then how, when, and where could you use it, right? So I want to open it up right now. I mean, Dan, you may have some questions coming in. So on either guiding your brain performance code in some new ways or redesigning time. And then the last two segments are shorter, very targeted on trust and communication, and then one on achieving bigger goals. So Dan, anything you want to put in play here? Any questions we have so far?
I don't have any questions other than, I know that some of us have talked about this in the past, and I know that it's not really super popular with males, but like journaling, does that help, like daily or hourly or something, or writing notes?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting call. I mean, there's some studies that, a pen in hand really does. It releases tension. It allows us to basically condense learning in a way that's meaningful for us. So, but I'd link that to note making, right? I would just build a case that in any form that you could make notes where you're reflecting on what you're designing some new program, for example, for those of us who are in training. Can you start with no notes at all? Just a blank sheet of paper and use your instincts and jot some notes. And that tends to light up brain pathways that give you fresh perspectives. So I think journaling is a really good way to get some things, in process that keep us growing as human beings, Dan. So that's a really good point. But there are a lot of ways to do it. And I'm always asking myself, is there a brief way to do it? And we could talk about, mindfulness or meditation and mindlessness. And my question with meditation, there's some really good research that if you meditate or you practice mindfulness, it can be really health giving. It can help you focus. Great. My question is, how little time can I spend doing those, right, to get a benefit? And the truth is, it can just be 15 seconds. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes. And the data that's interesting on that is being mindful, really powerful to health and to focus. But there's data saying that when you're working on mindfulness, you're killing creativity. So there's a balance. We need time to be mindless. Now that's back to the brain downtime. When you're just being creative, you don't have an agenda. You can just go with the flow and you're sensing things and experiencing things. Those balances really keep us young, keep us more and more capable, as opposed to getting stuck, being hyper-focused and, hyper mindful and missing the balance. So Dan, hopefully that helped a little bit.
So
anything else on your mind?
So one of the questions that we have is why 21 minutes? Why not 15 or 30 or?
Sure. Well, and for you, each of you individually, it could be 15 or 30. What we started with is what we call the golden hour. We thought there's this hour window, like that hour when you shouldn't be flexing your spine, from Dr. Stuart McGill. And we said, look, in that hour, what should human beings do to unlock their best possible performance where they continue to be always better today than yesterday? What is that hour? And then we started asking, all right, look at the data. How could we compress this time? How little time could we spend on average? And we worked our way down. We went from an hour, we worked our way down to 21 minutes. I think we're about to make a jump maybe to 17 or 18 minutes. We're coming down. But what we're looking at are data cuts, right? So when I look at just human beings in general, if you just did 5 minutes, it would help you. But is that enough to send enough of the right signals to your brain to set the whole day up? So for example, with children, there are studies where you can predict their ability to learn in the afternoon, for example, based on what they did or didn't do first thing in the morning. Breakfast, and what do they do in the beginning? And you can project and then track it during the day and measure the outcome. So the data is just really interesting. So we're looking at what is this amount of time? And I think it may condense down toward 10 minutes, I think. If you were really organized and you could focus in, and you could start with just 2 minutes. I mean, it would help you. Any of those kinds of steps that I pointed out would be a help. That would help your brain start to upgrade energy and focus as opposed to downgrade it and then have to use caffeine and tension and anger and rushing and
So-
whatever else to feel energized.
So even as a child, their peak time of the day is still in existence. Like, do you carry that from your childhood? So like what you said, if you monitor a child and they learn more in the morning or in the afternoon, or by what they do
prime
or they
time.
construct, is
Yes.
that something that we carry with us, and is it changeable?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a degree it's changeable. I think for the most part, though, I mean, our families all have opinions here. Are you an early morning person? Are you, I mean, I'm talking focus here. Ironically, our most creative time, our creative prime time is not the same time as focus. The brain actually has to be tired. It has to have a little bit of fatigue for us to be highly creative. So that's why even in the evening, you with a notepad jotting notes, you may have your best ideas at a non-work time and non-creative kind of focus time. That's the way the brain's designed. But that prime time, and if you don't even know it, you experiment, right? If you're thinking, well, maybe it's 8 in the morning to 9 in the morning is when I can really dial in, or 7 to 8, or whatever you're picking. Just test it and then shift it by an hour next week and see if you are more dialed in. And use that time to focus on top priorities. Go 5 to 10 minutes on one, advance it, then say done, switch to another one next, and advance that. And you'll start to feel what that hour-ish of time, it might be 90 minutes for some people, maybe only 30 for others, but that time is golden.
So
And you want to use it.
We have the ability to train our brain to do what we want it to do.
We do. And we just don't take that's a great point, Dan. We just don't take charge. I mean, we almost assume like the brain knows best. And it did 2,000 years ago, maybe, to amplify the negative, and we were able to flee for our lives, and we survived. That is cool. In today's world, those instincts are not the ones that make us, shine and be the difference makers and unlock our potential. So anything else, on your mind, Dan, or any other questions come in? Good. All right. So let's jump to this next. So the third area I'm highlighting some areas where I think you can weave elements of this into training. You can use it personally and professionally in ways that will enhance both your personal and professional lives going forward. Every one of you can, each of us can. So this third area is intriguing because we have teams that study how trust is changing and how loyalty is changing and how communication is changing. To us, language is really, really important, right? The language we choose and how we use it, it matters because it helps get a message across, and the order in which we communicate really changes what's heard on the other end, on the receiving side. So I build a case that trust and communication are being reinvented. And the only question is, where are you in this picture, right? How are you doing this? And so this is Rachel Botsman, a quote from her at Oxford University. She wrote a book called Who Can You Trust? And her comment based on the data is, we are at the beginning of the biggest trust revolution in history. How human beings feel trust and loyalty is changing. It's not what it was previously in our lives. It's not that. It's different. And so we have to understand, how is it different? What do we need to do to make sure that how we're connecting with other human beings, how we're building networks, how we're remembering the names of other human beings and relating to them respectfully? How are we doing that in a way that fits the distraction and noise in the world, and how human beings are deciding where to put trust and commitment and loyalty? So that whole world is shifting. It's an interesting change. And I would build a case from the data that virtually everybody's brain today is primed to disconnect, right? They arrive to talk to you, or they arrive for a meeting with you, and you can just see it. They're checking their phone sometimes, they're looking at their watch without even maybe looking at it. Their eyes are just going there, and they're just wondering, there's probably something else going on I should be doing, not this. And so they're ready to leave. And not that long ago, that was not the case. People would come into meetings just either for the food or to hang out. I mean, it was just sort of more a thing to do, not to check out of in their brain, but to just hang around in. And that world is going away. So we just have to see this, that human beings are walking around assuming the next text, the next message, the next screen, the next something is the thing, and it isn't. And that's the present shock that I talked about earlier. That's what's frustrating, right, for the brain. So right now, there are at least, and this is an average, I think this number is about half of what it actually is, but 4,000 plus times a day, there are things we call attentional blinks, where people notice their phone, someone else's phone, they hear a ringtone, they hear a text sound, they see a screen, and whatever they were working on, they're now distracted, and they've lost momentum, right? So they're checking out. So those distractions are not just a little thing where you reset instantly, they become a big thing. So that ability to manage technology differently in a mix of ways, including in meetings, is really important. One of the messages from the data is to hide your phone, to just have an environment where you don't have a screen in view. And one of the reasons is, I mean, if you remember the old days of flying, especially in crowds of people, why are people watching other people's screens on the backs of their seats when they can't hear the audio on those movies? Or they're looking over someone's shoulder at a phone when the screen changes. It's called shoulder surfing. I mean, it's just the way the brain works. The hardwired brain is really something to watch. And when you have a device out in view, it does not have to ring. It doesn't have to light up. You have a screen in view in a room, in a meeting, if we're back to in-person meetings. It undermines the entire meeting. It drags it out. It just the way the brain anticipates. Did that screen flash? Was that something that's looking away? It's not with you. That's an issue. So this whole notion that, we need to put our devices away, well, we can. If we need them, great. Pull it out, use it, and then close it. Just put it away so it doesn't vibrate. It's not something in view. So at least in smaller team meetings, you with your staff, be really aware that having phones out, having laptops out with people typing and searching for things you can't see is probably something that undermines productivity, and it certainly hurts trust. So better to have briefer, better meetings, our phrase. And with a lot of our clients around the world, General Motors is one example, but there are all kinds of them. We work on these 15-minute targeted meetings. We work on 5-minute targeted phone calls. And the reason is you can put your technology away unless you need it. And you can zero in. You can be all here. And we can make really good progress. And then we move to what's next. Then you can check your messages if you want to, and so on. Another really interesting study out there, it's not one of the slides, but I'll share with you for a moment here, is that the leaders and teams around the world who work remotely, so they're in different places. They're not in the same room together, the same building together. When they use communication, it's called bursty communication in the research, but when they focus on answering emails and responding to texts and calls in real time, but only at 3 times a day, sometimes 4. And you let people know ahead of time, these are the times of day when I will check messages and be available if you need me. And other times I'm focused on being strategic, I'm making progress, and unless it's an emergency, I'm not going to be answering. So we have to be clear about this. Overall performance from that one change alone goes up 24%. So essentially you save an entire day a week by just not checking messages all the time. And I'd add another point here, to respond slower to some other messages right now that you respond too quickly to, with email especially. Email isn't texting, and you're conditioning people that you should respond instantly. And a side note in the world right now is, the best leaders we track are consciously not using high tech watches, for example, for technology. They could have an Apple Watch, but it's an actual watch while they're working. And the reason is, if I know you have an Apple Watch and you're texting and taking messages on the watch, and I know you have one and you don't respond to me, I hate you, right? So you're in this mode of like, wait, I'm now committing to be instantly available to everybody, and it's actually counterproductive in all kinds of measured ways. So traditional watches are still the norm in the best teams and performers in the world, unless they need the technology, like some of the health data, that's fine. But just checking endlessly and looking down at your watch or looking at your device endlessly, you start to see it's common. So we're really used to it, but it is not where the best productivity happens. It's not where the greatest effectiveness happens. So there are ways to start shifting when and where and how we use technology. Another point that really matters is context. And in neuroscience, we would say that context, the where things fit, the big picture, is up to 80%. It's maybe higher than that. Up to 80% of how people understand anything is, tell me where it fits when you're sharing this with me. And so where does this fit? Where does this lead? What that means in messaging, all of us grew up in a world where we learned essentially message like we would tell a story, right? You have a great opening line, you work your way through the details, and you have some punchline or conclusion. And our data from around the world would say that world is so gone. That's not how we communicate anymore. It's just not the way we need to do that anymore. And what we need is the opposite. We have to start with the conclusion. We have to start with, why would you even care about this message? That's the opening. If I have an ask for you in an email, I'm opening with my ask. I'm not building up to it 4 paragraphs later. So we call that front ending. So it's a whole new way to communicate where we're flipping it and we're starting a session with, where does this lead and why would this matter? Right. And then we'll get there. But rather than, it'll be a huge surprise at the end. You'll love it. Maybe in movies that does still work, but in the way the rest of us communicate, it doesn't work so well. So set the context. Part of why this matters so much is we all have at least 3 brains, right? You have a brain inside the cranium. It's the one that I learned about in neuroscience and was tested on, all those years ago. And then through the years, but we now know from a new field called neurocardiology, you have a brain in the heart. The heart isn't just a pump. There are 40,000 baroreceptors in the heart that are officially called the brain in the heart. And you also have a brain in your gut, inside the enteric nervous system of your intestines. There's a brain in there called the second brain by gastroenterologists. Those 2 brains are lightning fast compared to the thinking brain. And so you want to use all your brains, not just one. You don't want to just think. You also want to feel and you want to be able to interpret instincts. Are the heart and gut brains always right? No. But when they're reading something, they're finding a gap, they're sensing something, you want to pay attention to them. And because of that speed, human beings can read things way faster than we thought. So in communication today, there are now something we call 4 attention gateways. So there's this need whenever we're having a meaningful conversation with another human being, our mind has to be clear when we arrive. Back to my arrive ready comment, right? You have to be able to be all here and all in. You can't be distracted when you first meet with someone. So that's why in your schedule, building in little margins, a little 5-minute buffer, right, in each hour where you get your bearings back, you know what's coming up next. You're totally here when you're engaging with me. In the first 1/5 of a second, the other person's brain is deciding in every conversation you and I have our entire lives, the other person deciding, do I like you and could I trust you in a 1/5 of a second or less? And if you seem distracted, they don't like you. And I'm not talking fan club here. I'm talking, you don't seem genuine. You don't seem like you care. They're already checked out. They're maybe still in a conversation with you. They're so not really in it with you. Second gateway, a little 3-second window is, am I in or out? Right. So that's how that one's playing out as well. Right. 1/5 of a second, then 3 seconds. And if you make it past that one, if they're saying, okay, this might be interesting, I feel like you care, then every 30 seconds or so during a conversation, the other person's brain is asking something. I'm using the brain words here. Like, is this interaction worth a piece of my life? And the moment it feels like you're just coughing out information, it's some traditional training program, we're just going on and on and on, or reading information. It's like we're reading information I could have read online. I'm out. I'm already checking out. That attention gateway, I'm out of here. And so now we're learning, we as trainers too, we have to share things online that people could access. And in real time, we're focusing on highlights, on specific tools, not just on the overall information that I could read later if I wanted to. And finally, now I get to what's next, right? The last gateway, and that's how we have follow-up. We have people continuing to grow and to learn and to stay loyal and connected to us. We also change the words we use, right? So there's some really simple focusing words. I'll give you 2. We have dozens of these discoveries with our language teams. The word glimpse is really good for human beings. Share a glimpse into your progress. Great example of that. Share a glimpse into your plan. So I want to highlight, I want you just to give me the essence of what you're working on. That sounds really doable to the busy brain, right? Tell me about your progress. Show me your entire plan. Sounds overwhelming. Like the brain is like, I'm out of here. I don't want to have to do that. A glimpse feels doable. So use the word glimpse to check in with people, to get a quick update with people. Really powerful as a word. Glance. Let's take a moment to glance ahead and look back, right? You start a program with people. The brain is wondering context. Where does this fit? Right? Where does this lead? Where is this for me? And so you basically use a phrase like, let's take a moment to glance ahead and look back. If you lean in and upwire, if you learn and apply things, not just learn, what could change for you? All kinds of things that unlock your potential. And we're focused on this because it will move these priorities ahead faster. That's a glance. And all of a sudden the brain's thinking, okay, now I know why I'm here. This makes sense to me. And so those 2 simple words are called focusing words. Sometimes they're phrases, but these 2 are words. There are also certain phrases that a lot of us use that our language teams say we should never use again. One is thanks for your time. Don't ever thank another human being for their time. I mean, maybe years from now, it'll be okay again. But for right now, don't use that phrase. If you say to me, Robert, thanks for your time, and you mean it, because a lot of people say, well, Robert, but I mean it. I mean it in a good way. I think, well, terrific for you. But the data is going to measure what happens on the receiving end. When you say thanks for your time to me, my brain is going to automatically and instinctively say, I'm out of time. I'm behind time. There is no time. You caused it. And all of a sudden, whatever was just good with what we just did, you just shot that down with a phrase you don't even have to use, but you used it. We're just so used to it. Thanks for your time. So catch yourself if you use it. Substitute other phrases. I'll give you a couple of those in a moment. Another phrase never to say again to another human being is, I know how busy you are. Right? Because all you're doing is reminding me, what am I doing with you? Now that you're reminding me on that, why am I even here for this meeting? And so we don't need to say those phrases. We're just used to saying them, and they are all counterproductive. They undermine trust. They make people feel like that something valuable didn't happen when we say them, even if something valuable did happen. So we have to stop saying them. So switch to almost anything else. Right? It's been great brainstorming with you. Right? If that's what we put, not thanks for your time. It's been great brainstorming with you. You know, it's good to see the progress we made on this priority. Right? So if I'm with you, the busyness is away right now, even though my brain's saying I'm really busy. And so certain phrases you just move to the side and experiment with other phrases you could use, depending on the setting and the person. So they're phrases to actually replace. Another twist in the trust and loyalty and communication realm is this. In recognition, when we give recognition to people, there's a new discovery that we actually need to switch the order we typically use. So when we're thanking someone for making progress, we're thanking someone for a contribution, we typically thank the person first and then describe what they did, right? And that's a mistake in the order. And let me tell you why. So if I'm thinking staff or a team here or a group of human beings, the brain has a kind of, what's the best description for this? Like a worry that someone's getting favorable treatment. And so when an individual gets praise first, and then we describe what they did, the instant response in other human beings, maybe not everyone, but a lot of human beings is, it's totally unfair, right? Dan likes that person better than me. It's not fair. And I'm not really learning from what happened. I'm resisting because you didn't pick me. You picked someone else. It's kind of the teacher's pet, kind of a risk issue here, to use a phrase that some researchers have used. So what you do is you switch the order. When you're giving recognition, you consciously pause to recognize the improvement first. Right? Just the way this program came together faster, it was clearer, the way the design work was more effective than before. You know, thank you so much for, spending some extra energy on putting this together. That was really helpful. So I'm switching the order here. The person comes second, or the people or the team. What got improved, right? Where the initiative went comes first. That's a really important, it's a small distinction, really important. And then I want to keep everyone in a growth mode. So once I've recognized an improvement, then I've thanked the individuals involved with the improvement. I want to let that soak in for a few seconds, a little while, a few minutes, maybe a day. And then I want to ask, what do your instincts say about what's next? Where do we go from here? How do we make the next program even better? Do you have any thoughts on that? Were you thinking about it when we made this improvement? What do your instincts say? Linking what's next to an improvement just makes it become this continuous way to get better and better. That's very natural to human beings. So that may seem like a little small adjustment in some steps. The data is really powerful under it. Final point is, I would build a case that as much talk as we have about feedback, that there's not, and feedback is a word that replaced criticism, which was replaced by an oxymoron, constructive criticism. Then we started using the word feedback. And I would build a neuroscience case that not one human being ever in the history of the world has ever jumped up in the morning saying, hope I get feedback. It's never happened in the history of humanity. And the brain perceives feedback as flaw finding. And I'm talking the hardwired brain. I'm not saying we're choosing to see that. The hardwired brain from 2,000 years ago does not want feedback. It feels like you're at risk then, you're picking on me, it's not fair. And human beings can handle a little bit of feedback. We all need it. We can't handle a lot of it. And so we have this rule we use around the world with client companies, and it's really powerful. And it's that we all need feedback. We can laser in. I mentioned earlier, how fast, to Dan's comment on failure, how fast can we absorb learning from a stumble? When something didn't go right, let's look at it. Let's learn fast from it. How do we do that? And it's what elite performers do all over the world and on our teams, but we have to apply it forward. So if I'm tracking how much time I'm spending analyzing something, 90% of the time I want to feed what we're learning forward. 10% of the time I can look back and analyze. That's a good average kind of rule of thumb. So here's what feed forward is. I want you to think about the difference. So when we're using feedback in a way to nitpick something, didn't like that very much, should have liked that. We should have changed the colors, it was the wrong time of day. And we could do this forever. The hardwired brain loves feedback. Our comment is it can criticize and critique forever. I mean, they're human beings. It feels like that. All they do is criticize and critique. They don't contribute anything. They can just tear everything apart. And that's that 2,000-year-old-ish brain. That's what the brain was designed to do, to analyze any risk from as far away as I can see it. Anything out of place. It's how the brain can read an entire article and catch 3 typos, but have no idea what the article was about. That's that part of the brain. I mean, it's crazy. And so we as trainers, we as leaders, have to see this and work around it. So yes, we need straight on feedback from people we trust, and we can analyze anything, and we all make mistakes for sure. But most of the time we have to use the learning and apply it forward, right? That's the magic here. So here's a statement on what feed forward is. So this is saying to each other, let me say this is, let's use the example. This is you with your staff. Building on everything we've learned, including what hasn't worked well. How can we be our best ever for what's next? Right? The next training, the next session coming up. How can we be the best we've ever been? Using everything we've learned, including the things that haven't worked well. That statement, you can say it in a lot of different ways. You can use it in a lot of different ways. It's a line of hope for the brain. People get less defensive. They really work on learning. They work on innovating and applying learning. It's super powerful. So 10-second leap on these changes in trust and communication. What stood out to you? I mean, is there anything in there on how you might change the way you front end messages, you set the context in training more clearly? You even have these 10-second leaps a little more often. We're reflecting back. What stood out to you? Just pick one thing. This is just you inside your mind, grabbing one thing your instinct said, well, maybe that would work. Maybe I should test that. That might be interesting. What other words might be getting in the way? Maybe I should observe. That could be another reaction. And then how, when, and where would you apply this? With your family, maybe it's personal. Working on communication with a loved one, that's great. It's a great laboratory to test things. Maybe it's with your staff or your team. When, where, and how would you test it? That helps the learning and the recall go up. And then final area here, just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end and for Dan to wrap up as well. This whole notion of goals, right? We have a team that a few years ago said to me, let's look at goals, right? How do we set them? How do we pursue them? How do we achieve them? And I thought, like, why? There's so much stuff published on goals. I think all of us grew up in a world where, I think we have pretty good basic advice on how to set, pursue, and achieve goals. So I reacted by saying, really, like, we need to look at this. And my team said to me, look, we just pulled 2,000 studies up from the last 5 years. And if you look at all 2,000 studies on how best to set, pursue, and achieve goals, the essence of the findings of those studies is if we did everything the opposite of how we thought we needed to do it, we would have much better luck achieving bigger goals. And so I said, okay, all right, let's look at the studies then. What's in here? So I want to share a few highlights with you, and I think you could use some of these in how you teach and how you structure learning and training, how you set your own goals in some cool ways. The data would say that 90% of the top goals for human beings in the world fail. And somehow we're just used to setting new ones. I set a big one, didn't work. I'll just set another one. And apparently we're okay with this. I'm not okay with this data. I mean, the data, it shocks me that we're this bad at achieving our top goals. And there's some reasons for it though. The first reason is we need to plan in reverse. We don't do this well. We learn that what we do is we set a goal, we have a goal, and then we just put one foot in front of the other every day and get through the day and keep popping our attention up every once in a while to look at the goal. And that's not reverse planning, it's forward planning. Planning in reverse crushes that. Planning in reverse is called future introspection, and it helps the brain keep aligning what's happening today with achieving big goals. So all that means is during the day, I'm glancing ahead way more often Where does this lead? Am what I'm working on today, how is what I'm working on today lining up with my top goals and our top goals? And so I look out there at the top goal, what it will feel like, what are we going for here? What's the effectiveness? What's the impact of it? And then I'm looking in at how we're doing what we're doing today, asking what could I adjust to speed us toward that outcome? That's called planning in reverse, or reverse planning. So we need to do that way more often. So we need to be glancing ahead more than we do now. This is every human being. We don't do this well by nature. We can learn how to do it. We just pause more often between meetings. We're glancing ahead. I have my bearings, we call it. I know where I'm going. I know why I'm in this meeting. I know where this meeting leads. It's exciting. Mondays are powerful, right? Mondays are really interesting. Monday is called a temporal landmark in neuroscience. It's the best day for setting and re-energizing goals. Somehow, just the way the goals hook in our subconscious and conscious, way more powerful on a Monday. Goals should stretch us, but here's an interesting finding from a number of studies, but fantasy equals failure. Big, hairy, audacious goals hardly ever come true, and they're fun to set. I mean, they're pretty daring, but the reason is they cross the line into fantasy. So your brain has to figure out, if you set a really big goal that stretches you, the brain still has to guess, if this happened, and then I learned that, and then we work together, I think we could do this. Whatever that line is on stretch, that's as much stretch as you want. So go for that goal and hit it, achieve it, then set the next one. The moment you go for fantasy, right? You want 100x the results. You want to accomplish the entire week in 4 minutes. It's fantasy. Like this, human beings like having those exercises. They never tend to lead to great results. Worse, the moment your brain drifts into fantasy, it undermines progress. It actually stops you from growing and achieving goals. So the stretch line is something all of us, when we plan things or we're asking people in a program to set a goal, it has to be really call upon them to really grow, but it has to be something they feel that if they really committed to it, it's achievable. And then we just set another one and set another one and set another one, and they can go higher and higher. Emotion matters. It's called emotional experiential memory in neuroscience. I need to see people's eyes light up. You have to feel the goosebumps from your goals. They can't just be a financial goal or a time goal. It has to have feeling to you. We call it most amazing future in our research with families. What's your most amazing future? And it's evolving. You can't see the whole future, but what is it to you? What do you want to do more of? What less of? Who do you want to spend more time with? Who less time with? It's your most amazing future. And your family members would have a voice in this, and it has emotion. And emotion is what ignites behavior change in service of that goal. So we need feeling. And we've lived in a business where a lot of it is thinking, and we helped pioneer emotional intelligence research years ago. This is a huge point. It's small, but it's big. The point I mentioned earlier in the first 21 minutes, every single day, pulling out your biggest goals, a handful of them, and one by one, recommit to them for a moment. It so raises the chance that these goals will become embedded in your subconscious. So you will walk around every day with these instincts saying, say no to that, say yes to this, go a little deeper over here. Why? Because they're advancing the biggest goals you have. So that recommitment every day embeds in your subconscious. We call it a first attention priority, this ability to achieve these big goals. So on that goal, stretch just for a moment here before the Q&A, what stood out to you? Is there anything you could test? So I'm not saying you don't have to believe any of these points. You can just test it. You have your own laboratory in your life and in your work. What stood out that might make a difference to you? How, where, and when would you test it? So you add that next area, and that starts to make this learning already become yours. So what I'd like to do for a moment, Dan, is, whatever questions that come in, we'll answer them looking back across what we've touched upon. I have just one ending story. It will take just a couple of minutes at the end to wrap up. So whenever you want me to share that, I will. So what's going through your minds? I'm hoping that I have stretched you some with some of the insights, some of the small tools that might be new to you. What's going through your minds right now? What could I answer?
You guys can unmute yourself and ask anything you want.
Yeah, you can jump right in if you want. So anything on your mind, what have I stirred up you'd love to learn more about?
Phil, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
So my question would be, with everything that we covered, there's quite a bit. I mean, there was a lot covered. If someone's going to change their total approach on how they do things, which
Sure.
a lot of things could be added to change, from sleeping habits to daily interactions to how you take calls. With all of it together, what would you recommend if you're going to start with a couple things? This is what you should start with.
Well, the first, I mean, Phil, it's a great question because first you want a handful, not just one. So that earlier point where you want to get a small handful of typically small adjustments you could test, and the ones that don't work, you test them briefly and then let them go and substitute something else. The right question to answer your question is, what do your best instincts say? Right. And when you look at it yourself, because for some of us, the place to start could be personal. I mean, maybe it gives you a chance to just do some brainstorming with a spouse or significant other or family member, and you start there. It's fine. I mean, we're outcome measurers. My whole company, we use data and we measure, it feels like everything, but we're really flexible about where you start. And so I think your instincts are really important. Like, where are you in your life, in your career right now, in the changing world? Are you working in a brand new program design? Great. Maybe grab a few of these adjustments and put them to the test, right, with how you design that program. And maybe it's, just picking one area where you're thinking it might be easy. Maybe that's the call also. What feels like it would be the easiest test for you that might give a real positive result. And just start there. We tend to measure things week by week. So the other piece of advice that I'd share that's really a good piece of advice, I think, is measure things weekly, right? If you don't see some uptick, you're not saving steps, your energy's not higher, your family doesn't like you better, right? You're not more effective. You're not getting more time to innovate. You're not condensing some of your meetings where you have a little margin where you can be really ready for the next one. If it's not helping you in any of those areas, then let it go. And maybe later on it can help you, but right now, so don't keep doing it. The brain just loves to collect things. And one of my grandfathers, when I was a little boy, would say to me, don't try harder, try differently. So once I worked on something for a little while, we're really good as scientists here we'll test and measure and we'll let things go. So Phil, hopefully that helped. I mean, that's where I would start. I happen to love the Apex operating system. I mean, I think I wish we all had arrived today with that blueprint on how to wake up in the morning, and you'd be telling me, Robert, here's what I do. This is what really lights up my best days. And here's how during the day I'm really resilient. I use this tool. I'd be thinking, oh, awesome. I want to take a note on that. That was great. But the irony to me is we only see this in the most elite performers in the world. And meaning the ones often with huge risk to what they do. They're at the leading edge. And how they learn is really different. And so much rides on, that for them. So you might want to, look at that Apex operating system as well. So what else is coming up for questions?
Anybody else? All right. Well, if you want to tell your story, and then I'll just talk about, or if you would rather me
Sure.
talk about the follow-up session that we're going to have.
Yeah, no, I'll wrap up with this story right now for a moment, and then you go to the follow-up session. So perfect. And what I'm hoping is, before we do the wrap-up story and then Dan's comments, is that what I've done is I've constructively irritated you in some way. Like there's a part of your brain just saying, I wonder if there's something in here, and maybe there are other areas that we haven't touched on that we could go deeper in for a few minutes in this follow-up session. And just knowing that's coming, I'd love for you to make notes along the way. What stood out? I mean, what have you actually learned and applied that's different? Did anything build off, what we touched on in this session? And some of it's just you observing, right? How are you getting, like in a corner where you're in a tunnel and you're just doing, and you're tired at the end of the day, like one of the opening comments that we had, but you're used to it. Yeah, I know you can do it because you have endurance, but what if you changed one thing up? How did it get better? And making notes on that. And then we'll reconnect on some of those later on as well. So I want to share a story from my dad's dad, my grandfather Cooper. And it was the last conversation I ever had with him. And I was 17 years old, so it's a long time ago. But he and my grandmother would go every summer. They would drive from where we lived in Michigan to this lake in northern Minnesota, one of the headwater lakes of the Mississippi River. And and there was a little cabin there that they loved. And this is a picture from the windows of that cabin. This is the picture of the lake from that window. And this last summer, they drove there and they were there. And I'm working my summer jobs. I'm 17 years old. It's before I went in the Marine Corps. And just, it was late at night, 11:30 at night. It's dark out. And I come home from one of my summer jobs and the phone rang and I answered and it was my grandfather. And I remember thinking to myself, because I knew this cabin, and I remember thinking to myself, why are you calling me? Right? It's late at night. Why are you calling me? And I knew the nearest phone was a quarter of a mile away through the woods. Second nearest phone, 5 miles away on a corner, a little store on a corner. And so I know he knew he was at one of those phones when he called me and he said, Robert, I have a question for you. And I remember standing in the kitchen thinking, I'm pretty used to this. Both my grandfathers leaned on me when I was growing up and they had pretty deep questions for me when I was growing up. And they wanted me to think about leading in ways that other children my age, boys my age weren't thinking maybe. And so they just wanted that for me. And so I remember standing in the kitchen thinking, I'm probably ready. What's your question? But I wasn't ready for what he asked me. So what he said to me, and he had survived 4 heart attacks before this call. This is before coronary bypass surgery. He lived through 4 heart attacks. And I got to experience him going through each of these heart attacks. And so he said, I have a question for you. And so I'm on the phone in the kitchen. And his question to me that night, though, was, if you knew you only had 1 hour to live, who would you call and what would you say? And I remember standing there thinking, that also didn't really surprise me. It was a pretty deep question. But I bet he was testing me. That's what I thought. And so I thought about it for a moment and I said, Grandfather, I call you. And he said, and I'm calling you. He said, I'm not sure I only have an hour to live, but he said, Robert, my heart doesn't feel okay. And I made your grandmother help me go through the woods to get to the farmhouse, to get to the phone, to call you because I wanted to speak with you. And later on, my grandmother said, here she is going in the dark. My grandfather with 2 canes. She has a flashlight with dying batteries going through the woods to the farmhouse to call me. And this whole call lasted 5, 6, 7 minutes with my grandfather, last time I ever spoke with him. And what I loved about both my grandfathers is they would pull what they'd learned about what they wish they had known sooner in their lives forward for me. I mean, they each had a lot to be proud of, and we could have spent more time focused on that. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to look back at what they wish they'd known way sooner. And out of this last call, my grandfather said, I want you taking some notes. So on a pad on the kitchen countertop, I took notes during this last call. And in this call, some of the phrases my grandfather wanted me to remember, he shared with me. So I wanted to share them with you. He said, build more, run less. Easy to build, easy to run, just be busy, running. Pause more often and build more things that matter. The running's easy. He said, care more, carry less. He said, Robert, I never want you caring less about other human beings, but I want you carrying less of the stuff, emotional baggage, burdens from other human beings. I want you caring more and caring less. He said, grow more and react less. Reacting's easy. You just react to what happens in the world. I want you growing instead. Choose that. Work in winning. He said, I want you to know that you don't have to work more to win more. You can find ways to win more and work less. Maybe not every day, but more days. Do that. And he said, all along the way, I want you living more and regretting less. He said, it's really easy to keep pushing off living until later. Don't do that. And so I wanted to share those with you. I mean, those to me are really important points. And they echo what my grandfather Downing said before when I started the session today, which is we must become what we can become. And as directors of training, you are the catalyst in this. You literally are the guides for, so many thousands of people that work so hard. And they have so much opportunity. And I just wish the best for you in that as well. So Dan, I'll hand it back to you.
Usually helps if I unmute myself. Well, sometimes that helps. It's interesting. The hook that got me in Florida was the constructively irritated, because I was. There were so many things. I'm like, could it be that simple to do this? Could it be that simple to wake up differently, to go to bed differently, to look at things differently, to intentionally irritate myself with projects or whatever. And even though, coming out of that wall covering meeting, we built, a P3 tech program, and we built some relationships with some vendors that were really cool. But that stuck in my head more than anything that I learned the whole time there. And I hope that it resonates with you guys as much as it did with me. A lot goes into these little webinars. I know it doesn't seem like it, but all the scheduling and the meetings and the paperwork and the uploading onto the LMS. And I want to thank, you know, Anton and Antoinette and Rose and Nicole and Doc Funstein and Gavin for all their help with this. I really appreciate it. And I'm not going to thank Dr. Cooper for his time. I'm just going to thank him for his words.
Thank you.
And let me see here on the chat. There's a couple things. All right. If anybody else has any questions, we can end with that. And there's going to be a follow-up probably in, I'm guessing, middle of February-ish. We want to clear the holidays. We want you guys to take some of the stuff that you learned today and implement it. Don't implement one, implement 5 and see what sticks. And then be prepared to, in February, you know, we're going to lead up some stuff and send out some informational stuff that we want you to share. Not only successes, okay, because the failures are important too. So let's hear what didn't work and maybe we can find another way, or maybe it worked for somebody else and they can share their experience. And that's what we're going to kind of delve into in February. And we're not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but it will have that aspect. We're going to, like I said, share our positive stuff and negative. So
Great.
Are we good? Are we clear? I know we went a little long and I apologize,
Right.
but
I think we're good.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. We
You're welcome.
appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everyone.
And we'll be in contact with you guys.
Sounds perfect. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Be safe.
See you, Adam.
Thank you.
See you guys.